Hey y'all, welcome back to our new Roots and Boots YouTube channel. I have a video to share with you that I made last year in 2019 about my method for covering one of these raised bed garden boxes with row cover. I used it last year for growing broccoli. This year I'm growing broccoli again under row cover, but the row cover is out in our far garden. I decided that from the house I didn't like to see my big covered wagon, covered raised beds out here. Also, thanks for bearing with me as my videography skills improve, but the content of this video that I'm about to show you is really solid if you need to add row cover to your raised bed boxes. This is a great method for doing that. I'm so excited about my broccoli plants. If you've watched any of my other videos or followed along with any of my posts, you might know that I've tried to grow broccoli and cauliflower for a couple of years, but never very successfully because of the caterpillars and the worms. Maybe you've had a similar experience. And I've mentioned these row covers and how this was my plan for this year, was to try the row covers. It's like, finally, it's come down to this. I'm determined to grow broccoli and cauliflower, and I know from experience that the worms and caterpillars are almost impossible to control organically, and I refuse to use anything that's not organic. So I bit the bullet and did the row covers this year, and I'm so impressed. I'm such a fan of the row covers, and I have a feeling I'm going to be using them every year for my brassicas. My collard greens, I didn't realize, or I wasn't really thinking about how they were in the brassica family. I haven't tried to grow them much before. They're getting eaten. Let's see if I can show you. They're right over here. I don't know if you can see. They're actually doing okay, better than the broccoli and cauliflower. The broccoli and cauliflower just gets totally decimated. But the collard greens we've still been harvesting and eating. I think I might grow them under row cover next year. But I want to show you how the broccoli is forming heads. Inside, farther in here, you can see some of the heads forming, like that one, and there are more down there. So I'm so excited. This is the first time that I have seen with my own eyes on my own property in my own garden what a healthy broccoli plant looks like. And you know what is sort of funny about this is that I totally goofed with my broccoli plants early on. I grew all of this from seed, and I accidentally left the broccoli seedlings outside. I was going to start hardening them off, but it was a very rude awakening for them. I left them outside too abruptly, without getting a chance to pot them up, so they were still in the seedling tray, the seed germination tray, with no drainage holes. We got a horrible storm overnight, like I'm talking horrible wind, huge winds, so much rain. I thought I lost all the broccoli plants because they were drowning in, a sea of water in this tray, and they had been whipped by the wind, and it was awful. I felt like the worst gardener in the world. And but I potted them up, and I know that plants can be very resilient, especially if you give them good care. So I potted them all up in good soil and put them in the cold frame to protect them, and kept watering them and, letting all of that excess water drain out. And this is the broccoli that got totally stressed during that storm. So just goes to show that you should never give up on your plants. And it also goes to show that row covers are the way to go. If you have had trouble growing your brassicas, your broccoli, and your cauliflower or collard greens, the worms don't seem to bother the kale, in my experience. But for broccoli and cauliflower, I highly recommend row covers. Okay, so I've been talking about row covers and how much I'm loving them for my broccoli and cauliflower. Also using them for my squash, melons, and cucumbers. That is still an experiment that is underway. But if you're wondering how to actually put up the row covers and what to use to do that, I will show you what works well for me. There are different ways to do it, different materials you could use. We kind of went with basically the cheapest material we could find for the hoops that the row cover attaches to. and it has worked really well for me. So I'm going to show you a couple of things that we use. The first thing that you need is something to use as your hoops. We like this conduit. Here, I'll show you on this hoop that's in the ground. You can see it's 1/2 inch and it's called rigid PVC non-metallic conduit. I guess its trademark name is Intertech. It looks like this. It's hollow in the middle, and you see how you can bend it. You don't need any special bending device to bend it. It's not super flexible, but you can bend it. It's sometimes a 2-person job unless you can get one side anchored really well. I actually did all my own hoops this year. Many of you know that my husband Greg is sidelined with a major knee injury. He had surgery. So if I can do it all by myself, you can too, but it does help sometimes to have a second person. 2 ways to do the hoops. In my raised beds here, which are about 2 feet high, I have found that it's not necessary to use any sort of special anchor. I literally just shove the conduit, the hoops, way down in the garden boxes on the sides. You can see how that's wedged down there between the dirt and the wood side of the box. Over here I have some hoops that are directly in the ground. They're covering melons and cucumbers. And when I'm going directly into the ground, especially if I have a smaller, well, I shouldn't say especially if I have a smaller hoop, especially for the bigger hoops too, because the bigger hoops can really catch the wind. We have a lot of wind here, so properly anchoring the hoops is really important for me. In fact, I should show you what happened out in the far garden. A few of the hoops I didn't anchor well. I thought they would be okay, and they did fine for weeks, but we had some really high winds, and the hoops came out and my cover blew off, and so my broccoli and cauliflower out there is totally exposed, which is obviously not what I was going for. But so to properly anchor your hoops if they're going in the ground, or even in a raised bed, to be extra cautious, extra safe, you want to use rebar. So the electrical conduit you can find in the electrical supplies aisle of your big box stores. Conduit is in the, I don't know what to call it, it's like with all of the concrete supplies, and it comes in different lengths. I think this is 12 inch. I think this is the smallest size that you can get. But what you're going to do is pound, decide where you want your hoops to be in the ground, and pound this rebar in so that you probably want it to be about halfway in the ground and halfway above the ground. Just use a hammer and pound it in where you want it to go. And then that conduit, I showed you how it's hollow. You're going to slide it right over the rebar, which is pretty easy to do on the first side, but then the tricky part is then bending the hoop and at the same time sliding it down over the second piece of rebar. So that's a little bit of a challenge, but again, I was able to do all of that on my own, so I believe in you. I know you can do it too. Next, you're going to need the actual row cover. A lot of people call it by its brand name, just like, Band-Aids or Kleenex. We know those products by their brand names. So this is Agribon. So if you hear anybody talking about Agribon, it is row covers. It comes in different heights, different sizes and different weights of the actual fabric. So I'm going to tell you exactly what I use. You want to use the lightest possible weight because you're not really trying to shield your plants from temperatures or anything. You want them to still get light. You want them to still get the rain. And if you use the right weight, then you're going to still allow for that maximum sunlight to penetrate the row cover and the rain, but not the bugs. So what I am using is AG15. It says 9057 Agribon AG15 row cover. And I'm using 118 inches by 50 feet. So because it's 50 feet long, I do wind up cutting it, which is fine. It's usually, I think, more cost effective to buy it in longer lengths and cut it to the size that you need it. What's more important is to make sure you get the right width, that it's going to fit across whatever size hoops, whatever size row or bed you're trying to cover. You can get Agribon from different garden retailers, seed retailers. I'm pretty sure you can also get it on Amazon, and I will post purchasing links for you. Another thing that I totally recommend, it's not absolutely necessary, but I have found that it made a world of difference for my success with row covers. I actually tried to use row covers last year, but I did not have these last year. And the row covers did not work for me because I couldn't secure them properly. There are a number of ways to secure the row covers. Some people like to just lay really heavy things down along the sides all the way down the length of the row of row cover. We tried that last year, and I found it to be very cumbersome. It really deterred me from getting under the row covers and like weeding or tending to my plants because it was such a pain in the rear to move all of that stuff. So maybe I didn't use the right kind of heavy stuff. You can use sandbags. We just used heavy stuff that we had around, like pavers and bricks and I don't even remember, really heavy logs and things like that. So you can use a number of things. A couple of things to keep in mind is that whatever you use, the more smooth it is, the better, the more friendly it's going to be to your row cover. So we've used things before that are rough, and then the row cover will catch on that and tear. You obviously want to avoid tearing the row cover because that's bad. That makes holes, and that's how the bugs get in. So this is the solution I have landed on. These clamps do make it a little more pricey, but for me, it's worth it, and you can reuse them from season to season. So it's like an investment. The row covers, in my experience and from what I've heard, you can get one good season out of them. If you're really careful with them and store them well, you might get 2 or 3 seasons out of them. But the row covers, if you're going the row cover route, I think you just kind of have to accept the fact that that's going to be possibly an annual cost for your garden. So I like to start in the center, and a good tip is to always line up down the center of your row cover. It's going to say Agribon, and it just keeps repeating down the row cover. So line that up on the center of the hoop. That helps you make sure that your row cover is centered. And then I like to use these clamps, and I'm going to show you specific information about them in case you want to purchase them. But these clamps, so I use a clamp in the center over the Agribon words, and then these hoops right here in this location get a lot of wind, so I added another clamp here about halfway down on this side, and then of course one at the bottom. So that's the side that really gets hit by the wind. On this other side, I did not need a clamp at this middle spot on the hoop. But then, of course, there is one at the bottom. So I used 4 clamps, 4 clips per hoop for these tunnels, these row covers here in this very windy spot. Someone commented, I think on Facebook, that these look like covered wagons, and they totally do, don't they? So I sometimes call them my covered wagons. Each of my boxes is about, I think 10 or is it 12 feet long, and I used 3 hoops per box, and again I used the 1/18-inch Agribon in the lightest weight, and then I put extra clips, although you know what, on some of these hoops I don't have that extra clip. I guess just on those end 2, that might have been because I didn't have enough clips available when I was putting these on. So you kind of just have to play around with it and see what works for your location. If you don't get a lot of wind, you might not need that extra clip in the middle. But anyway, it's worked fantastically. And then for some of them along the sides, they were billowing out a little. So we just had these random clamp things, and I was able to use those on the sides. You could use whatever. You could even, in fact, on one side, I think I used a log, a skinny log, or a stone when I ran out of those clamps. So you kind of just improvise and use whatever you can to keep the fabric in place and to prevent any gaps so the bugs can't get in. We use the 1/2 inch conduit, and for the clamps I get the 3/4 inch size so that they will go around the conduit and the row cover. The clamps are pretty rigid, there's not much give. It's a little tricky to pry them off, you know, when you're wanting to get into your boxes or if you need to reposition your row cover or reposition the clamp. But it's been working just fine. So the 1/2 inch conduit and the 3/4 inch clamps, 3/4 inch, and this is what it looks like on the front. It says snap clamp, and I'll post links to all of these if you're wanting to try them yourself. You can get them on Amazon. Okay, so to secure the end of the row cover, I told you how to secure it on the hoops, which is great, but then you're going to have all this length of row cover at the end to close up your covers, and I'm going to try to show you how I do that at the bottom. So here's the raised bed, and you can see I drove a rebar stake into the ground right up against the box, and I have it sticking up considerably. This is sticking up higher than I would want for securing the hoops, like I said, and it's a little bit wobbly. So you definitely want to drive this farther into the ground when you are securing your hoops. But this one on the end, I wanted it to be a little bit taller. Then what I do is I just start gathering the row cover and twisting it around the rebar stake, but you want to keep it you don't want to let it bulk up because the clamp isn't going to fit over it. So you want to keep it as flat as you can. So then I can just keep pulling the cover over and over the stake until I feel like this is pretty snug against the box on both sides there. And then you're still going to have all this extra, or I cut it so that I would have extra because I want to make sure, again, we get a lot of wind and this will totally just, the wind will just grab this and blow it all over the place. So I'm going to show you what I do next. Let's see if I can do this with one hand. I just sort of take that extra tail of agribon and twist it around the stake. Sorry, I need to mow and weed eat around my boxes here. I'm getting caught in the weeds. So then I just twist it around a couple of times to make it extra secure. And you could, if you wanted, you know, use another bigger type of clamp at this point to put around that. Those snap clamps obviously won't fit around all of this mass of row cover. But this has worked for me, even, and like I said, we get a ton of wind, and this has held the row covers secure for me. We use the full length, I think it's 8, no, it has to be more than 8 feet. Whatever the full length of the conduit is, that's what we use for the big hoops here in the raised beds. But then I sometimes cut them in half. That's what I have right here. Maybe it is 8 feet. Would that be right? Because I'm just a little over 5 feet tall, and this is half of one of the conduit lengths, and it's almost as tall as I am. But I use these halves for smaller hoops. These are the smaller hoops here over the melons and cucumbers. To cut them in half, we just use a power saw. Just slice them right in half. It's super easy, and you can make smaller hoops with the half lengths, or you can make bigger hoops with the full lengths.